The wind howled through the testing facility of Stratos Dynamics. Jet engines roared, fuel fumes thick in the air. Jordan Miles knelt on the concrete floor, scrubbing a fuel stain with steady hands. A procession of executives passed overhead on the steel catwalk. Among them, Selene Ward, 32, CEO, her dark skin luminous under the industrial lights, heels clicking like gunshots. She glanced down, her voice slicing through the noise. "Careful there. Don't let your hands touch something you're not qualified to understand. Jets aren't for people who only know how to mop floors." Laughter erupted around her. Jordan stayed still, his brown eyes lifting toward the steel gleam of the fighter jet behind glass, the place where he once belonged. Selene Ward had inherited Stratos Dynamics 6 months ago, when her father died of a heart attack in his corner office. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly convinced that weakness had no place in the sky. The board of directors, mostly older black men who'd built the aerospace industry alongside her father, watched her every move, waiting for her to stumble, to prove that a woman in her early 30s couldn't fill her father's shoes. So she became harder, colder. She fired underperformers without hesitation, cut budgets that didn't show immediate returns, and built walls around herself so high that even her own reflection felt like a stranger. To Selene, the world was divided into 2 kinds of people: those who flew and those who fell. And once you fell, you didn't deserve to look up. She'd grown up watching her father command rooms, negotiate billion-dollar contracts, shake hands with generals and senators. He taught her that respect was earned through dominance, that sympathy was weakness dressed in pretty words. When he collapsed at his desk, she wasn't there. She was in Tokyo closing a deal. She flew home to an empty office and a legacy she wasn't sure she could carry. The funeral was private. The press conference was flawless. And every night since, she stood in front of the mirror practicing her father's expression, the one that said nothing could break her. Jordan Miles had fallen a long time ago. He was 35 now, with rich, brown skin that still carried the Arizona sun. But the scars on his back made him feel older. He'd been a fighter pilot in the Air Force, flying F-16s with the Phoenix Squadron, a unit so elite that their missions were still classified. He'd flown over deserts and mountains, pulled maneuvers that defied physics, saved lives that would never know his name. Then came the mission in Arizona. His wingman's engine failed at 20,000 feet. Jordan broke formation, stayed with him, guided him down through a sandstorm that turned the sky into a wall of rage. They both survived, but Jordan's jet took shrapnel from ground fire. He ejected over the desert, spent 2 days in the sand before rescue came. The injury to his spine ended his flying career. He was honorably discharged, given a medal he never wore, and sent back to a life that no longer fit. His wife Sarah had been his whole world. She died of cancer during his physical therapy, and he couldn't even hold her hand without shaking from the pain in his back. Now he lived in a small apartment with his 8-year-old daughter Amara. She had her mother's warm smile and his love for the sky. Every night he told her stories about flying, about clouds that looked like mountains and stars that guided pilots home. But he never told her why he stopped. The medical bills had emptied his savings. The veteran benefits covered some, but not enough. So he took the only job he could find that didn't require standing for 12 hours, janitorial work at Stratos Dynamics. It was humiliating at first, working in a place where he'd once been respected. But then he realized something. Amara could come with him after school. She could sit in the corner and draw. She could breathe the same air as the machines that touched the sky. And that was enough. Amara would sit in the corner of the Stratos hangar while he worked, sketching airplanes in a notebook she carried everywhere. Her drawings were surprisingly detailed: engines, fuel lines, wing structures. A young black engineer named Doug Trent noticed her once and spent 20 minutes explaining thrust-to-weight ratios while she nodded, absorbing every word. Jordan watched from a distance, mop in hand, and felt something crack open in his chest. This was why he stayed. Not for himself, for her. Selene found Amara in the restricted testing zone on a Tuesday afternoon. The little girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a faded blueprint she'd found in a recycling bin, her small brown fingers tracing the lines carefully. Selene's heels announced her arrival. "Who let this child in here?" Amara looked up, startled, her dark eyes wide. I was just looking. This is a place for people who know how to fly, not people who dream." Selene gestured to the prototype fighter behind glass. "Do you know how much that costs? More than your house? More than anything you'll ever touch in your life?" Amara's face flushed. She stood, clutching the blueprint to her chest. "I'm sorry. Where's your parent?" Jordan came running, his uniform damp with sweat. He'd been 2 floors down when someone told him his daughter had wandered off. "I'm sorry, ma'am. She won't..." "What? Wander into a $1 million facility again?" Selene's dark eyes swept over him, taking in his uniform, the mop and bucket by the door. "You think mopping floors in a hangar will get you back into the sky?" The words hung in the air like a blade. The room fell silent. Other workers stopped, pretending not to listen. Jordan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Not here. Not in front of Amara. He took his daughter's hand, gently pulling the blueprint from her fingers. "Come on, kiddo, let's go." As they walked toward the exit, Amara whispered, "Dad, you used to fly, didn't you?" He looked down at her, his throat tight. "Yeah, kiddo. But now I just need you to live in a world that still has skies." That night, Jordan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the tattoo on his right arm, a pair of iron wings with the words, "Wings of Valor," inscribed below. He hadn't looked at it in months. It reminded him of everything he'd lost. The sky, Sarah, the version of himself that believed he mattered. But it also reminded him of everything he'd saved. His wingman, Richard Ward, the rescue team in the sandstorm. He pulled his sleeve down and went to check on Amara. She was asleep, her notebook open on her chest, a half-finished drawing of a jet engine visible in the moonlight. He kissed her forehead. "You'll fly one day," he whispered, "with your wings and mine." Doug Trent was a veteran engineer at Stratos, 63 years old with salt and pepper hair and a limp from a helicopter crash in the 80s. He'd seen a lot of faces come and go, but something about Jordan Miles stuck with him. One afternoon, Doug was walking past the maintenance bay when he saw Jordan crouched near a workbench, tightening a loose bolt on a dolly. The way he moved, precise, methodical, efficient, reminded Doug of someone. Not a maintenance worker, a pilot. That night, Doug pulled out an old photo from his desk drawer. It was a group shot from a military gala in 2012 honoring the Phoenix Squadron after a classified rescue mission. The photo was grainy, but Doug had been there. He'd shaken hands with every pilot in that room. He squinted at the faces. Then his eyes widened. Third from the left. Same build, same jawline, same eyes. The man in the photo wore a dress uniform, medals across his chest. The man in the hangar wore a janitor's uniform and never smiled at all. But Doug knew he'd seen enough men carry that weight to recognize it. The next morning, Doug approached a younger colleague in the break room. "You ever hear about the Phoenix pilots?" She shrugged vaguely. "Weren't they all killed in some mission?" "That's what they said, off the books. Supposedly, the whole squadron went down over Arizona during a training accident." He nodded toward the hangar where Jordan was working. "But I don't think they all died." She frowned. "The janitor. Look at him. The way he moves. The way he looks at the jets. That's not a man who just cleans. That's a man who flew." The rumor spread quietly like smoke under a door. People started watching Jordan differently. Some with curiosity, others with doubt. A few of the older engineers began to whisper, pulling up old news articles, comparing dates and faces. Selene heard the whispers during a budget meeting. She was halfway through a presentation when one of the executives muttered something to his neighbor. She caught the words janitor and pilot and slammed her hand on the table. Are we seriously talking about a janitor being some kind of war hero? This is a corporation, not a fantasy novel. But the words stuck in her mind. That evening, she found herself standing in her father's old office, looking at a photograph on the wall. It showed her father, 20 years younger, shaking hands with a young black pilot in a flight suit. The pilot's face was blurred, but the insignia on his chest was clear. Phoenix Squadron. Her father had never talked much about that day. She'd asked once when she was a teenager, and he'd only said that a pilot had saved his life during an emergency landing in Arizona. A pilot who refused a medal and disappeared. Selene stared at the photo for a long time. She thought about Jordan's face, the way he'd looked at her when she insulted him, not with anger, but with something quieter. Sadness. Then she turned and walked away. It couldn't be him. The crisis hit on a Friday. Stratos' new prototype engine, the Horizon X7, designed to revolutionize fuel efficiency in military jets, was scheduled for a live demonstration in front of defense contractors, journalists, and a delegation from the Pentagon. It was Selene's chance to prove the company's dominance, to silence the board members who doubted her. But during the pre-launch test, the pressure readings spiked. The combustion chamber was destabilizing. Engineers crowded around the monitors, arguing, their voices rising in panic. Selene stood at the center, her arms crossed. "Fix it, now." One of the lead engineers shook his head. "We don't know what's wrong, Miss Ward. The specs are perfect." "Then check again. We don't have time. The demonstration is in 6 hours." Jordan was mopping the floor 20 feet away. He'd learned to make himself invisible during these high-stress moments, but he couldn't help glancing at the screen. The schematic was projected on the wall, large and detailed. He saw it immediately. The second exhaust valve was reversed. It would create a feedback loop at high altitude, destabilizing the chamber and potentially causing catastrophic failure. Exactly the kind of mistake that killed pilots. He hesitated. This wasn't his place. He was a janitor. But then he thought of Amara drawing airplanes. He thought of the pilots who would fly this engine. He thought of his wingman, the one he'd saved. He set down his mop and stepped forward. "Excuse me." Selene turned, irritation flashing in her eyes. "What?" "The second exhaust valve. It's reversed. That's why the pressure is uneven. It'll fail at altitude." The room went silent. Engineers stared. Someone laughed nervously. Selene's expression darkened. "I don't need a lesson from someone who mops floors." but Doug was already pulling up the valve diagram on his tablet. His face went pale. He's right. He held up the tablet. The installation team reversed the flow direction. If we launch this, the engine would blow at 20,000 feet. Selene stared at the screen, her breath catching. The lead engineer confirmed it 3 minutes later. They had 48 hours to fix it before the demonstration. The room erupted into motion. Selene stood frozen for a moment, then turned to Jordan. He was already walking back to his mop. Wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. How did you know that? Jordan glanced over his shoulder. Lucky guess. He picked up his mop and walked away. But Doug watched him go, and his suspicion solidified into certainty. That wasn't luck. That was years of flight experience. The demonstration day arrived under a steel-gray sky. The hangar was packed with contractors, reporters, military officials in dress uniforms, and a senator from the Armed Services Committee. The Horizon X7 engine sat mounted on a test rig, gleaming under the lights. Selene stood at the podium, delivering her speech with confidence. Her voice was steady, her posture perfect. She talked about innovation, about American engineering, about the future of aviation. She didn't mention the 48 sleepless hours her team had just endured. She didn't mention the janitor who'd saved them. Then the test began. The engine roared to life, a sound that shook the walls. It was deafening, beautiful. The contractors nodded approvingly. The journalists took notes. The senator leaned forward, impressed. For 90 seconds, everything was perfect. Then the pressure gauge spiked, red lights flashed, an alarm shrieked. Smoke poured from the combustion chamber, thick and black. Sparks exploded outward, and suddenly the test rig was engulfed in flames. People screamed. Security rushed forward. The sprinkler system activated, but it wasn't enough. The fire spread to the fuel line, and a second explosion rocked the hangar. Through the chaos, Jordan saw a young black engineer named Kyle trapped behind the rig, his leg caught under a fallen support beam. The flames were spreading fast. Kyle was screaming, pulling at his leg, his face twisted in pain. Jordan didn't think. He ran. Selene shouted after him, but he didn't hear. He vaulted over a barricade, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and sprayed a path through the flames. The heat was overwhelming, pressing against his skin. His lungs burned, but he kept moving. He reached Kyle. "I got you." He lifted the beam, pain shooting through his back, the old injury screaming. Kyle scrambled free. Jordan pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the young man's shoulders, shielding him from the heat as they stumbled toward the exit. The fire suppression system kicked in. Foam and water rained down. Emergency crews swarmed in. And as Jordan laid Kyle down outside the hangar, his jacket fell open. His right sleeve had torn in the chaos. There on his forearm, stark against his brown skin, was the tattoo, a pair of iron wings with the words, "Wings of Valor," inscribed beneath. The room fell silent. People stopped moving. "That's the Phoenix insignia." Someone breathed. Doug stepped forward, his voice shaking. "That's the squadron, the ones who were declared missing in Arizona." Another engineer pointed at Jordan. "I knew it. I knew I'd seen him before." A journalist pulled out her phone, searching frantically, then held up a screen showing a grainy photo from 2012. The Phoenix Squadron. They saved a civilian rescue team during a sandstorm and were presumed dead when their jets went down. Selene stood frozen, her face pale. The photo in her father's office flashed in her mind. The pilot who saved him. She looked at Jordan, really looked at him for the first time, and she saw it. The scars, the way he carried himself, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with survival. Her father's words echoed. He didn't want a medal. He just wanted to go home. "It's you," she whispered. The hangar emptied slowly. Paramedics took Kyle to the hospital. Reporters were ushered out. Selene dismissed everyone except Doug. Then she walked to the maintenance bay where Jordan sat on a bench, stitching his torn jacket with needle and thread. His daughter's shoe lay beside him, the sole coming loose. He was fixing that next. Selene stood in the doorway. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Jordan didn't look up. His needle moved through the fabric in steady strokes. "Because titles don't save lives. I just wanted to teach my daughter that courage doesn't need an audience." Selene stepped closer. "You saved my father 15 years ago. Emergency landing in Arizona, sandstorm, rescue team trapped." He nodded slowly, still focused on his stitching. "Richard Ward, good man, told me to take the medal. I told him to give it to someone who needed it more." She sat down beside him, the CEO vanishing, replaced by someone smaller, more human. "I've spent 6 months trying to prove I'm strong enough to run this company. I thought strength meant never falling, never showing weakness." She paused, her voice breaking. "But you fell, and you're still here, still saving people. How?" Jordan finally looked at her. His eyes were tired but kind. "Strength isn't staying in the sky, Miss Ward. It's knowing when to come down for someone else." The words hit her like a physical blow. For the first time in years, Selene felt the weight she'd been carrying crack open. Tears filled her eyes, and she didn't stop them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for what I said, for how I treated you, for everything." Jordan tied off the thread and set the jacket aside. "You were scared. I know what that looks like. I've been scared every day since I stopped flying. Then why do you stay here? Why work in a place that reminds you of what you lost?" "Because my daughter needs to see that even when you lose your wings, you don't lose your sky." Selene nodded, her throat tight. They sat in silence for a long moment. Two people who'd been flying alone for too long, finally landing in the same place. "What happens now?" she asked. Jordan picked up Amara's shoe and began stitching the sole. "Now you decide what kind of leader you want to be. The kind who pushes people down to stay on top, or the kind who lifts people up so everyone can fly." Selene wiped her eyes and stood. "I want to be the second kind." "Then let's start tomorrow." 3 days later, the press conference was held. Selene stood at the podium, cameras flashing. She wore a simple suit, her natural hair styled in elegant locks, her face composed but open. "6 months ago, I took over this company determined to prove I was strong enough. I fired people who didn't meet my standards. I dismissed voices that didn't sound like power. And I insulted a man who turned out to be the person who saved my father's life." She paused. Jordan Miles is a hero. Not because of the medals he refused, but because he chose to stay on the ground to raise his daughter. Because he saved lives without needing credit. Because he showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about who you lift up when you do. The reporters leaned forward. "Effective today, I'm appointing Jordan Miles as Honorary Safety Advisor for Stratos Dynamics. He'll oversee flight safety training and mentor our engineers in the values of the Phoenix Squadron: integrity, courage, and service above self." Applause erupted. But when the reporters rushed forward to interview Jordan, who stood at the back in a borrowed suit, he stepped back. I don't need a title, Miss Ward. The room fell silent. Selene turned to him, surprised. Then what do you need? A classroom. A space where kids like my daughter, kids who can't afford flight school, kids whose parents work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, can learn about aviation. That's the real legacy, not medals. Teaching the next generation to fly. Selene smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. It was genuine, unguarded. Then we'll build it, together. The reporters erupted with questions, but Selene raised her hand. One more thing. This foundation won't just bear the Phoenix name. It'll be funded by a portion of Stratos' profits every year. Because if we're going to build planes that touch the sky, we need to build people who remember why the sky matters. The next day, construction began on a new wing of the Stratos Research Complex. A learning center with flight simulators, workshop spaces, and a scholarship fund for underprivileged children. They called it the Phoenix Initiative. Jordan stood in the empty room, imagining the children who would one day fill it, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. 1 year later, the Phoenix Initiative opened its doors on a bright Saturday morning. Amara stood at the front, holding oversized scissors, a proud smile on her face. Jordan stood beside her, wearing a button-down shirt instead of his uniform. Selene stood on the other side, no longer the untouchable CEO, but someone who'd learned to land, to be human, to lead with her heart. Behind them, a new jet prototype gleamed on the tarmac, painted with the Iron Wings insignia and the words "Wings of Valor" along its fuselage. 50 children from underserved communities filled the hangar, their eyes wide as Doug and the other engineers explained thrust, lift, drag, and dreams. They were kids from neighborhoods where college seemed impossible, where the sky was just something above the buildings. One little black boy, no more than 9, raised his hand. Can anyone learn to fly? Jordan crouched down to meet his eyes the same way he did with Amara every night. Anyone who's willing to fall first. The boy grinned, his front teeth missing, his future suddenly bigger than it had been 5 minutes ago. As the sun set, casting orange and gold light across the runway, Jordan walked out to the new jet. He ran his hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal, the rivets and seams and promise of flight. Selene joined him, her heels replaced with sneakers, her blazer gone. Just a simple blouse and jeans. Do you ever miss it? Flying? He nodded. Every day, but I found something better. What's that? A reason to stay grounded. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who understood. You know, my father used to say that the best pilots aren't the ones who fly the highest. They're the ones who bring everyone home. Jordan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman she'd become. Your father was a wise man. He learned it from you. They stood in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Inside the hangar, children laughed and dreamed. And for the first time in a long time, neither Jordan nor Selene felt alone. They'd both fallen. They'd both learned to fly again, just in a different way. The evening grew quiet. The children had gone home clutching brochures and scholarship applications and dreams that felt suddenly possible. The hangar lights dimmed to a soft glow. Jordan walked to the edge of the runway, the wind cool against his face. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the tattoo fully. The Iron Wings. Still sharp after all these years, still proud. Selene approached slowly. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you hate me when I insulted you? He shook his head, a slight smile on his face. I didn't hate you. I saw myself. You were terrified of falling. So you pushed everyone else down first, made them small so you could feel big. I did the same thing after I lost my wings. I pushed away everyone who tried to help, my friends, my therapist, even Sarah for a while. Until Amara reminded me that falling doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're human. Selene's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to be human anymore. I forgot somewhere along the way. Then let me teach you the same way you're teaching me to build again, to hope again. She looked at him, and something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But the beginning of something deeper. Trust, partnership, understanding. A shared sky where both of them could finally breathe. Deal, she said. He reached out his hand. She took it. Above them, the jet's engines hummed softly, the iron wings painted on its side, catching the last light of day, glowing like embers. It wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a promise, a legacy, a reminder that even when you fall, you can still teach others to fly. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone willing to fly with you. Jordan looked up at the sky, at the first stars beginning to appear, and thought of Sarah. He thought of the missions he'd flown, the lives he'd saved, the man he used to be. And he realized something he'd been too afraid to admit for years. He hadn't lost his wings. He'd just learned to use them differently, to lift his daughter up, to catch Selene when she fell, to build something that would outlast any flight he'd ever taken. You ready to go home? Selene asked. Jordan smiled. Yeah, let's go.